The Ship of Fools. The Ship of Fools is an allegory that was penned by Plato in his Republic that was about a ship that had a dysfunctional crew. The allegory is supposed to represent the problems that come with governance that prevail within a political system that is not governing their ship, that is based on expert knowledge. The allegory was very popular and it is still loved today, especially in Germanic-speaking countries after Sebastian Bratt's book Ship of Fools that was satirical in its ethos or nature. And it is said to have inspired Hieronymus Bosch's painting that bore the same name and image, which usually depicts images that is made up of men in a crowd aboard the ship that are dressed in traditional jester or clown's attire with cloth ears that at their end are bells. Many men were arguing, drinking and even fighting. In the book an entire fleet of ships set off from Basel that are bound for the paradise of fools. In the book Brandt conceives Saint Grobian, who is the patron saint of vulgar and coarse people. The cultural motif of the Ship of Fools was also utilized as a parody of the Ark of Salvation, which was synonymous in which the way that a Catholic church was styled in literary and artistic compositions of both the 15th and 16th centuries. A complex political satire that's images were repeated in at least 7 different prints of the 18th century that indicated their popularity shows. Pope Paul II wrestling with Frederick III of the Holy Roman Empire that were wearing naught but briefs and their respective crowns at the top of their heads on top of the ship's mast, along with emblems and labels that cover many other European powers, which is said to be representing the political fallout in 1468 to 1469 from meetings of the two men. After the Protestant Reformation, some took a sectarian turn. A woodcut illustration to an edition of Brandt's book in 1584 that shows the Antichrist sitting on top of the overturned Narrenschiff, while in the foreground St. Peter guides a small boat of respectively dressed men to safety towards the shore. In 1871 Benjamin Jowett translation recounts the subsequent story. Imagine then that there is a captain of a ship who is taller and stronger than any of the crew, however he is a little deaf and he also has the same infirmity in his sight and a lousy knowledge of navigation. The sailors are quarreling with one another about the steering as they all feel that they have a right to steer the ship, even though they have not learned the art of navigation, and will also assert that it cannot be taught, and they are ready to cut anyone into pieces if they argue with them about it. Then they gather about the captain, both begging and praying him to commit the helm to them and only them. And if at any time they do not prevail because others are preferred to them, they throw the others overboard or kill them, in that they annihilate the competition. On top of that, at having tethered the captain's senses with drink and drugs, they take control of the ship with a mutiny. They make free with the stores, thus eating and drinking as they proceed on their voyage in a manner what they presume what is apt or is actually expected of them. Whoever is their partisan and cleverly aids them in their plot for getting the ship out of the captain's hands and into their own, whether by force or persuasion, they compliment with a name of a sailor, pilot, or an able seaman, and they abuse the other sort of man whom they call a no-good-for-nothing. However, is it not so that the pilot must pay attention to the time of the year and the seasons and the sky stars and the winds and whatever else belongs to his art if he is to be really in command of the ship, and that he must also be the steerer at all times whether others like it or not? And the possibility of this union of authority with the steerer's art has never seriously entered into their thoughts or been made part of their calling. Now in vessels which are in a state of mutiny and are run or guided by sailors who are mutineers, then imagine that, like the Machiavellian Prince having favor over the philosopher king in the ruling of their government or their politics, and land is seen as feudal. How then will the true pilot be regarded? Will he not be called a prater, a stargazer, or a good-for-nothing? Of course Plato was writing about that all governments should have philosopher kings at the helm. However, the same can be said if in the game of life on our heavenly path that we should place spirit at the helm. By listening and letting it guide and nurture us with virtuosity and love in our hearts, because that would be the morally just and virtuous decision, and if there is an afterlife with comparative dimensions, that would place your soul in a good place on its everlasting odyssey within eternity.
Texts to Ellie, Imagine. Part 1. You know, I was thinking about the film yesterday last night, just before bed. Have you seen it? It's where this musician, who's having a hard time, and working hard, for a break in the music business, calls it quits on his musical career, giving up on his potential success. Because he sees all his efforts as futile, and all hopeless, and then on his way home from his final gig he gets hit by a bus in a road collision, while riding on his bicycle, and he ends up in the hospital. When he recovers he discovers that somehow he is not in his reality, because in this reality that he now found himself in. Just like the Mandela effect, which shows the discord or variations of the parallel worlds theory. That he wasn't in Kansas anymore, or on his planet, or dimension. Basically, there were subtle differences in each world, so he figures that he must be in a parallel universe. Although in all honesty, he doesn't mention hind, or hair of it, or about the connotations of him swapping realities. All he cares about is that in his new reality, the Beatles had had as much luck as himself at reaching success in the music business. In a nutshell, they had never succeeded either, and no one even knew of them. So he Googles it further, and he finds out to his utter surprise that yes, the Beatles didn't exist, and neither did Oasis, in this his new universe. Part 2. Then, I got to thinking. Say if Gregory the Great and Heraclitus didn't succeed with the former, there would be no devil because he made him up. And the latter, there would be no hell because he penned that. I mean, what would religion do without those two pieces of the Christian's hypotheses? And on top of that, if one were to postulate that the reason of how the parallel universe theory, that for scientists, it was to prove theoretically by utilizing the theory that life may exist on our planet, in our universe. But on a probability scale from 1 to 100 that life may not exist on 99% in the other parallel universes, clearly showing hypothetically that life is probably the effect of a chaotic random event, and that there is no God, or heaven, and that even if we are all good citizens, working hard and trying to be nice to each other, that there is no heaven waiting for us when our lives are either spent or over. Ultimately, if one can imagine in the aforementioned universes that when merged together, that heaven wouldn't even exist according to parallel universes multiverse theory, and that with or without John Lennon's classic post-Beatle all-time hit that heaven, hell and God would not exist for us all. Just imagine. Now, imagine this, that the scientists' hypothetical parallel universe, or multiverse hypothesis would explain a lot of things. But perhaps it would be like Cinderella's stepsisters forcing on the shoe even though it doesn't fit, because in that there is a high probability that God does not exist and life may not exist within an infinite multiverse. But cannot it also be stated and put to bed to suggest that the same probability clause could be got from a multiverse that is nothing short of a mind model, or the figment of a mad scientist's misinformed, over-dramatic, facetious, garbled rhetoric like that what is said by the philosophers when dealing with the ontological argument. For example, just because one can imagine a God amongst all the trimmings, or and splendor, it does not mean that their God must exist in the space-time continuum, or in our reality, parallel world or dimension. Part 3. Hiya. How's things with you? I would just like to say before I begin, In reference to our last text's conversation, that when we were foraging and or looking for the DVDs for my great-niece's birthday, that when we were in the charity shops, that I wore a face mask and gloves. So as I wouldn't spread the virus, and of course the shops being charity shops sell second-hand goods. As of all charity shops, and that from the past owner to the shopkeeper and or cashier, and finally to our spontaneously choosing the DVDs on the shelves, that from an objective or exterior viewpoint, that it would all seem to be the product of chaos and coincidences. However, when one looks at it all from an esoteric or objective mindset, that when looking at the whole picture one can clearly see that amongst the random, chaotic events and all the unforeseeable variables taking their toll, that at the end of the day everything fell into place from order to chaos, and then from chaos to order. Just like it can be said on our round trip to heaven. Part 4. I have heard it likened, when explaining chaos theory back in the day, that when one is in the London Underground drastically mulling their way hectically through the maddening chaotic crowd, that everything seems as if it is random and chaotic when looked down upon from within a watchtower. However, when one is in the aforementioned position and making their way to their would-be destination, that when looking at it philosophically in one's position in hindsight, at the end of the day, when one is back home and sitting on the sofa reflecting upon the situation or event with a cup of tea and cake, that they and everybody else had a purpose and a potential destination. Therefore, although from the above perspective, that it all seems chaotic and random, that in reality everything is in order, and the same can be said for our seemingly chaotic escapade when searching for Luca's DVDs. And I know that the series of synchronicities and serendipities, which are the grace of God, will be misunderstood by the intellectually impotent minds that govern and rule in the Machiavellian Prince's kingdom. And in his world there is no room for God and his holy flock, whose treasures are not of this world, who are governed in their hearts and souls with Plato's philosopher's king's ethos and Francis Bacon's wisdom of that knowledge is power. So let us overpower nature with our knowledge and create heaven on earth. And show those Machiavellian kings that they might not care to believe in a creator for whatever reason, be either logic or folly, or they just don't want to share their toys on this savage planet, or are just plain greedy, unscrupulous contingent authorities that nevertheless, as the wind blows, the rain falls, the earth absorbs and the sun shines and feeds, that at the end of the day, as good old Doris Day sang in a provocative and profound lyrics, what will be will be. In a land with no devil, or deep blue sea, or heaven and hell within eternity. What can be said that if one has an ever-loving, honest, open heart, and appreciates the gift of life and everything that comes with it? Whether we have souls or if there is a God or not, when one crosses over after a life well spent, that you will cross over with love, peace and wisdom in your heart. And just like the song Nicotine says, your thoughts become a door for is your thoughts and your mind's eye and your virtuosity, love and compassion, that is the guiding light that lights and leads us with our intuition and aspirations into an eternal paradise.